Have you ever been caught in the middle while two people are arguing, trying to get both sides of the story? It can get dizzying, and I guess that's how many of us feel trying to keep up with the corporate battle, personality clash, boardroom tussle, whatever you want to call it, or at least we'll find out what exactly it is on today's episode between First Bank Nigeria Holdings and General Hydrocarbons Limited. I am Joanna Mustafa, and of course, this is in good company. Who better to provide us insights on today's episode than the corporate stories encyclopedia himself, Ugodre Obichukwu. It's a pleasure to have you in.
Great to be here. You guys keep dragging me into all this.
Yes, you have all the juice, you have all the details. So we have got to get all of it. And specifically today, with what's going on between First Bank Nigeria Holdings and General Hydrocarbons Limited. So I believe the public got wind or picked up on some sort of tension early Q3, mid Q3 last year, if I'm not mistaken, when there was that constant postponement of the AGMs, and there was words of, the chairman's locking horns in courts and all of that. So provide us some sort of background and perhaps a timeline of events that have led up to where we are now.
That is going to take us days.
This is a whole book.
So it depends on, what are we talking about now? Is it
So First Bank Nigeria Holdings, obviously it sounded, or we have the sense that there's some sort of prelim, right? This didn't just come out of the blues. We picked up on some level of tension with the board, like I said, Q3, between about, I don't want to be the one to mention the names. I'll leave you to mention the names. But we picked up on that with the constant postponements of the AGMs, and then the court battle, about shareholding, who's the majority shareholder and all of that with First Bank Nigeria Holdings.
Okay, so I think there are perhaps two different, things going on.
They're not related?
Related.
Okay.
Maybe related. But there are two different things happening concurrently. So yes, as you rightly mentioned, flashback, a couple of years ago, Femi Otedola started buying into First Bank. The gist on the streets is that First Bank started having internal issues with the then CBN governor. Actually, I think it all started when the board of FBN Holdings at the time fired their managing director, Otedola. And the banking industry is very well regulated. And so it didn't go down well with CBN because they didn't approve it. That was Emefiele-led CBN at the time. And so they intervened and basically fired that board as well, and then gave them a timeline to bring back the MD CEO. In fact, CBN did bring back Otedola at the time, and they then appointed CBN directors as well. So, and let's all remember, First Bank is a very strategic bank for Nigeria, so even for the government, because they do a lot of, banking activity. So it's
Former
almost like
CBN at some point, right?
Maybe, but it's almost like a de facto CBN for the government. It's a very strategic bank for Nigeria as well. And so, when that happened, I think kind of behind the scenes, for those who know Otedola very well, he's very skillful when it comes to acquisitions on Nigerian stock exchange or stock market. And so I think he started buying FBN Holdings shares. And then at some point, I think in 2023, he kind of declared significant holdings. And in the equities market or Nigerian stock market, if you own more than 5% of a publicly quoted company, then you got to declare and that ownership. And so with Otedola basically out of the scene in terms of majority shareholding, that sort of paved the way for somebody else to come in. Now let's remember that on that board was also Adenuga as well. Adenuga was also a majority shareholder with First Bank. But I think because he had also been a director in other banks and majority owner in previous banks, I think for that reason, he couldn't also be on the board himself, but he did have appointees on the board. And then in the other majority shareholder as well, which is the Odukalis, there's the ones that own Leadway Assurance, also had significant stake in the bank as well, even though it was mostly through their pension fund. And so they had a seat on the board. So these were the guys that were basically in charge of the bank for a pretty long time. So, but with Otedola, who was like the single majority largest shareholder, out of the way because of his issues with the CBN, that paved the way for Otedola to come in, and so he came in. But it's not easy to just get into it. Like, there's no Nigerian company that you can come in easily and you want to take over. I mean, people are always going to give you...
Put up a fight.
Yeah, put up a fight, which is fair in the corporate world, really. And so he comes in and then, announces majority shareholding. And of course, CBN... looking for some kind of stability or some kind of, partner, in there. And remember, Otedola already had, Geregu, listed company as well. And he's had several listed companies on the exchange before. And so now he is foray into banking, which was kind of strange at the time because he's never really been active. I mean, he's owned stakes in banks before, but he's never really been an active banker, in quote. And so then he comes in and then he's allowed to appoint directors into the board because, of course, he now had significant stake. I think at some point he now became the second largest single shareholder after the Otedola, right? And so he appointed two people on the board, one on the board of First Bank and then one on the board of FBN Holdings. So that was the start of his control of the bank. At that time, he wasn't on the board yet. So
you can see that he has all the details. So this is me now trying to separate the issues because you have said there's some sort of line here. Now, with Otedola's ascension to that position in First Bank Nigeria Holdings, there have been a group of minority shareholders, I think those having about 10% holdings in the bank, who are not pleased, and maybe there are others who aren't pleased as well. And I think I've put forward some sort of motion, called for an EGM to oust him as chairman, saying that he's turned it into a personal enterprise and they're not pleased with the private placement and all of that. So let us a bit into that. And is that something they can do? Oust him as chairman?
So you've fast forward it.
Okay,
so
we gotta please fill the gaps.
A little bit, right? So that, we can get to how we got there as well. Right. So, of course, last year, 2024, Otedola became chairman I think it was actually 2023 or so. He was now appointed to the board of the bank, of the holdco as chairman. So that's when the control now started. And so last year in 2024, he now appointed some more board members, very experienced people going by their CV on the board as well. And also had a new MD for, FBN Holdings. The new MD for FBN Holding came in late 2024 as well, who was a former ED in GTB, Wale Oyedeji. But before then, it appears Otedola also now fell out with Adeduton as well because as the story goes, there was some fraud in the bank, and I think maybe they weren't happy with the way that was perpetrated, even though it wasn't, had no connection to Adeduton. But I think because of the way it was under his watch, and everything I'm saying is based on what is out there, press releases and information here, and so Adeduton resigns from First Bank as MD. Now, remember that Adeduton was on the same boat with Otedola before.
Right.
So at some point, he had to resign, and then a new MD was now appointed within the bank as well. And again, so that was now further control that Otedola was now having on the bank. Now, behind the scenes as well, where they need to recapitalize because the central bank had already given banks targets to recapitalize over 2 years. So First Bank also, just like other banks, also wanted to recapitalize. And so the interesting thing was that First Bank actually planned to have a right issue as far back as 2023, but there were court orders. And so that's when the series of court orders started to stop that. When you have right issues, it can have a way of diluting ownership of businesses. Yes, I think the other side, I think the Otedola side saw, which by the way, they are the company that they own, that had stake in First Bank is called Barbican Capital.
Right.
Yeah. So they saw, they now went to court and tried to stall the right issue, and they did stall it. Yes. They got an injunction, and so but last year, the court sort of turned in favor of First Bank, and then they ended up having that right issue last year. Within that last year as well, the central bank came in and sort of cleared up who really had the most shares in the bank. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was now Barbican Capital that had the most shares in the bank as verified by CBN. And Otedola's shares had also now increased. But Otedola had single largest shares as an individual, right? Barbican Capital had as a company. And this was at least as at the last audited accounts that we had seen. So whether they've increased now or not, we really don't know. But that was what it was. So they went on to have their right issue, which they announced was successful. And so, but within that last year, a lot of things had changed.
A lot of reforms.
New MDs was in, new board of directors. Yes. And then towards the end of last year, they now have a number of their top executives also left ahead amicably. So some took severance and left the bank. And then new people now went up. And then I think they even spun off one of their other subsidiaries. I think it was the merchant bank or so that they didn't need. So a lot of changes over the last 1 year.
And
First Bank.
To the public, FO seems to be the face of a lot of these changes, right? That's Femi Otedola and sort of reforms. He has been very vocal about the corruption and the need for reforms within the sector. He came out, to talk about windfall tax in support of it. So, I mean, what do you make of, those moves he's making and the reforms, which not many people, and I won't say many people, a number of people aren't exactly delighted about?
Yeah, interesting, because interesting that you mentioned that, because last year as well, there were a number of posts that he did, I think on a social media handle in support of the windfall tax. And he did also subtly mention, recklessness, I guess, in quote, with
private jets
and all that banks are doing, and we need to have a new beginning and blah blah. And he also supported the recapitalization, which a lot of people didn't support early on when the CBN wanted to do that. So he kind of had been playing his game, right?
Yeah.
So he's basically, been out there shaping his own narrative pretty clearly. And so, yeah. And then towards the end of last year, back to your question, original question, then the General Hydrocarbon issue now
I was
popped.
going to get there. How did they enter the group chat? Yeah.
So before I like that, they entered the group chat. So so the injunction, which is now happening simultaneously with this, is because after the right issue, there's meant to be a private placement as well.
Right.
And I remember that the recapitalization is 500 billion, and so they haven't finished raising all the money that they needed or that they need. And so the first phase was the right issue. The second phase is a private placement. So private placement means it's not money to the public. So it's just to a few investors. And so the Barbican Capital side are now the ones that are saying they don't want the private placement to happen. That's the minority shareholders, them and I guess a few other shareholders.
Right.
And they're saying they don't want the private placement to happen. And the conventional gist out there is that because there's fear that if it does happen, it could dilute them down further.
Right.
Which also increases the control that Otedola has in the bank. So that's a different battle that is going on now. How did General Hydrocarbons get into the group chat, if I use your word. So very interesting as well, because you have to go back to, I think, 2020, when there was, according to the letter that we saw that General Hydrocarbons wrote. So these things are all out there. So this is not me making up these things.
So much history.
Yeah. So there was a loan that was going bad for First Bank. And it actually wasn't only for First Bank, for a lot of banks. There was a big oil and gas company, I don't want to mention their name, got indebted to a lot of banks. And I think the transaction went pretty bad. And so banks had to take significant write-off. So according to General Hydrocarbons, if First Bank had taken that write-down, it could have essentially wiped out the shareholding of the bank and could probably make the bank, make TBN take over the bank essentially. That is his claim. Of course, First Bank are denying that. But then, so he says, and so they now stepped in and they said, you know what, we will come and fund in a new oil and gas asset that they own. So if they fund it, they will have some kind of profit share. And then that profit share would help clean up the other bad loan.
Right.
Right? So that was the deal that they had. This is General Hydrocarbons' version. And so based on that deal, First Bank then released the loan of $225 million for them to do their oil exploration and start to actually produce crude. And so over the years, the loan went bad. And so General Hydrocarbons couldn't pay down their obligations according to First Bank.
Right.
And so General Hydrocarbons said, well, it was because of the way the loans were released. The loans weren't released on time. It was too staggered. And so by the time the money came,
Right.
cost had escalated and they couldn't do a lot of stuff. And so that is why the loan didn't help that much. And so they wanted a new $53 or so million loan. So that is now fast forward to 2024. But by that time, Otedola was already in control of the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And so he now had better insights into some of the deals that had occurred before him and didn't approve of the, the extra loans and asked that the $24 million that was due, be paid down. And so General Hydrocarbon said, no, we had an agreement before. You have to give me an extra loan so that I can continue my exploration, because it is when I do that exploration that I make money that I can use to pay you as well. Well, First Bank says, no, we checked how you spent the last one we gave you. It wasn't spent according to the plan. Some of it was diverted for private use and all that. So we don't trust that you're going to make good use of that money.
But that $53 million, if I'm not mistaken, was part of the agreement.
No, so the $53 million was like an extra loan that General Hydrocarbons want First Bank to give them so that they can continue with exploration. So typically when you take a loan sometimes, if the business is going well, you can go back to get extra lines and you keep going, right? Yeah, so that happens. But First Bank point is that the first one we gave you, you can't account for it. So we're not going to give you a new one. And besides, some part of that loan had fallen due, and so you had to pay that first. Right.
Of course, there are two sides to this story.
Exactly. Always two sides to the story.
It has landed in court, right?
Yeah. So good. So I think what that then happened was, so both sides started having, back and forth on what to do, on whether to give us a loan or not. First Bank insisted, we're not going to give you that loan. Okay, you know what? Except we get a new CFO appointed in your organization, new CEO appointed in your organization, like have executives appointed in General Hydrocarbons so that they can have a line of visibility. General Hydrocarbons says, I think they didn't really agree with the terms of that arrangement because it kind of looked like to them, it was going to be a takeover of their business. And so they didn't want that. And so that went on and on and on. And then, of course, when you can't have gentlemen agreements, that's when courts step in. And so I think General Hydrocarbons went to court. First Bank also went to another court as well. So General Hydrocarbons, based on their press release, got injunctions against First Bank not to seize, I guess, some of their assets. First Bank went to another court, Federal High Court, and got a Mareva injunction to seize their entire assets.
And that
Now,
has been
it's a bit
executed.
confusing here because, you're going to the same two different courts. So General Hydrocarbons is saying it's illegal. You went to two courts. You went to another court when we had already gotten one before you.
Right.
First Bank is saying, well, yes, you did go to court, but it wasn't everything that you asked for that was given to you. So what we got was the ones that weren't given to you was what we got an order for. And so they got a Mareva injunction. And a Mareva injunction is one of the strongest kind of injunctions you can ever get, because what it essentially does is it seizes the entire assets of an organization and the individuals behind that organization. So what it then meant was
individuals
the assets of the individuals who may have guaranteed the loan. And so that is why they seized all General Hydrocarbons assets. I also hear that they froze the bank accounts of Nduka's companies. No, this has got nothing to do about the Otedola now.
All right.
This is now just between GHC and First Bank. And of course, GHL rather is Nduka. He's the chairman of the company. And FBN Holdings is Otedola. So it also kind of looks like it's between Otedola and Nduka
I was
as well.
going to get there. So there are a lot of people who are seeing this as more than just a corporate battle or corporate clash, that the companies are just the front. It's more of a personality clash.
It's a personality clash, obviously, but I think it's more of, it's initially a corporate battle. But of course, it's always going to be a personality clash, because these are the two heavy guys that are behind book company. And these are not kids. These are like doyens in their own, businesses. And so, Nduka is a well-respected, doyen of the media. Otedola as well is in oil and gas space, now in banking. And so when you have clash of heads like that, it's always going to be pretty brutal. And so, and everybody's likely using, what they have, right? And so Otedola has also basically used some of his connections as well and his mic to try and get, things done. So I understand that from what we read in the papers 2 days ago, the Mareva injunction is already in place and they started seizing assets. The Navy guys went to see some of the assets of General Hydrocarbons. And General Hydrocarbons on the other side, issuing out a lot of press releases denying. Defending as well. So it kind of looks like they're now on the defensive, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the funny thing is that now on the individual level, you're now seeing on the front pages of This Day and some other newspapers also accusing Otedola of doing all sorts of other things as well, right? And saying that shareholders wanted him out because they don't want him to be bank chairman anymore. So that's also putting him on the ropes as well. So it's almost like a huge, battle back and forth. Now, the Otedola link here is that it appears the General Hydrocarbons team and the Otedola team seem to be aligned. So you know how these things are. When you have corporate battles, like it's all about interest. So if my interest and your interests align and we have common enemies, then we're allies. Then we're allies, right? Yes. So that looks like what's going on. So the common enemy for the General Hydrocarbon side and the Otedola side, which is Barbican Capital, is Otedola and his control of First Bank. And so that is why it kind of looks like they're aligning. So if you notice, most of the reports that you hear or the press releases kind of, look like it's aligned. So the yesterday or during the week, we did hear that there was another court order arrest it's like it's happening every day. And I think whether they were claiming Otedola was owing some money somewhere and then he had to pay, so EFCC has already been unleashed.
We're airing different people's dirty laundry.
Exactly. So the other side has also come out and said, no, we're not owing anybody, we're not in control of the bank anymore, so we're not in management. I was a chairman at that time, I wasn't in the management, so why you and so that is on already. So as you can see, it kind of looks like the battle is being waged on different levels. So Otedola seems to be waging his battle on a legal level, on a media level as well. as well as on the financial level.
Right.
It kind of looks like
so it's more
war
personality
games. Yeah, but at the end of the day, so like a soldier friend of mine used to tell me, like, when you're trying to wage a war, you'd have to
all fronts.
Not really all fronts. So they usually have things that they do. So there is this media, right? When you're waging war, there's money. Follow the money when you're waging war. There is also the weapons itself, when you're waging war as well, and there's the diplomatic sentiment. So here as well, and then of course there's allies. So you can see Otedola's methodology kind of seems similar, right?
Similar.
So he has allies. I think there was a picture with him and the president that came up
with
during the week.
President.
So
how do you beat that?
So I don't think that picture was just there for the fun of it. There's got to be some undertones around that.
There's a document.
So, it was holding. We don't know what's in that document. So, and then after that picture, and then I heard that, look, they're now on the high seas and they've seized some of those assets. So looks like there's some sort of alliance going on from there as well. Then he's also waging on the court side as well. And then there's also waging on the media side too. Now, on the other side as well, the General Hydrocarbon side, they seem to also waging their war on the court side as well. And then waging on the media side. Now, on the alliance side with, the powers that be, I don't know, perhaps maybe there's something going on there. So it is quite interesting that all of this is happening. And
may the best man win.
To see it.
May the best man win.
I don't know whether it's about the best man winning, really. At the end of the day, this is, as much as it's a battle for two heavyweights, is also deposit funds that is at stake here. And what everyone wants at the end of the day is businesses that are well run, great corporate governance, and then investors should have their investment protected.
And let's get to that, right? So there are lawyers watching, there are bankers watching, there's a $225 million loan, there's a obviously lenders are watching to see what comes out of this. So what would you say are the keynotes and lessons to be taken from this? And how do you see this perhaps changing how financial institutions look at situations like this from legal standpoint and from a lender standpoint?
Yeah, I'm happy that you're asking me this question after we had already asked people this, because there was a story on Nairametrics that sort of covered this as well. And gleaning from that story, I think what some of the guys that we spoke to are saying is that, look, this is not the first time we're seeing marital injunctions in Nigeria, or even court injunctions to seize assets. The challenges has always been to execute those sort of injunctions. And I mean, think about it. If you're going to seize an entire ship on high sea, who's going to do it for you? It's got to be the Navy. And does the Navy have time for that? You get so it's not easy to implement like injunctions. So you have to carry the court along, you have to carry enforcement people along. So you've really got to have the might and the way to do that. And so what we're hearing is that, look, people are studying and seeing how this is panning out, because there are quite a lot of oil and gas loans that have gone bad and are waiting recovery, and banks have taken provisions for them. In fact, banks took a provision of about 1.5 trillion naira as at September last year. Probably going to be more by the end of the year. And compare that to the whole of 2023, provisions was 1.5 trillion estimated. And the whole of 2024, it was less than 600 billion. Sorry, 2022, less than 600 billion. So you can imagine that we've like tripled. And most of these are oil and gas assets. So lawyers are also seeing how this battle is happening in court, and how the lawyers on all sides are also defending their sides, because it's really going to be a template for what is to come, and how, battles like this between lenders and borrowers are sort of addressed. And you know that at the end of the day, for investors too who are watching, everybody wants their funds protected, right? So investors are also trying to see, like, look, even if you invest in banks, do banks really have what it takes to recover their bad debts? Do organizations also have fair hearing as well? That's right. Borrowers, do they have fair hearing when it comes to loan recovery? And then there's also one crucial part that we haven't really explored yet, which is regulators. Like, where are they in all of this, right? Because we haven't heard from any of them yet. We haven't heard from the CBN yet on this. I guess in time, the CBN is probably going to address this issue. We haven't heard from SEC as well, which is a super regulator as well. So I guess at some point they're going to address it.
All right, and we'll be covering that Nairametrics. But of course, when two elephants fight, the grass, I don't know whether the grass is suffering. We're talking about the shareholders now, right? And the customers of the banks as well. How has anything changed or been affected for them? The stock itself, those other things.
Yeah, so you want to look at this from the point of view of depositors and shareholders and what the bank is saying. So we haven't seen depositors complain. Nobody has said, look, I'm trying to get to the bank and withdraw.
Right.
So we're not seeing anything like that, even though we did hear that some major depositors were worried. But I think a lot of those concerns have been allayed. And from an investment point of view, I think that First Bank shares has gone up, right? It was up last week. I don't know whether it's going to remain up this week.
For that?
Well, I don't know. So the fact that it's up perhaps suggests investors are not worried about it. Yeah, I probably think that they'll get through this. Maybe they think it's a good thing because typically you expect the share price to sort of drop massively. Right. And so the share price has sort of been okay, still hovering around 29, 30 Naira, quite a premium to their right issue price. In terms of depositors as well, like I mentioned, seems like depositors are not worried. So far, First Bank has come out to issue their own press release explaining what had happened and that there's no problem within the bank. It's normal for minority shareholders sometimes to complain or to make demands or to, it's pretty normal. I mean, it's all called minority rights. They have their own rights to do those things. So that's fairly okay from that point of view. Where you should start to worry is if at the end of the day, this might stop the bank from achieving their recapitalization goals, then becomes a problem. Yes. And I think at some point CBN will probably need to stop that. Or if it starts to affect the operations of the bank, maybe there's no MD or everybody's mad, there are mass resignations and things like that. But we haven't seen any of that yet. So it kind of looks like, this is just two battles of elephants that might not affect the grass. Perhaps,
right? The grass might just be greener at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But how far out, is there a resolution inside, or do you think this is something that's going to stretch out, for a while?
Yeah, there will always be resolutions.
Inside,
this is not the first time we've seen a battle like this. I think the Owando battle remains pretty fresh. Owando and
how does this rank
Mangal and all that. I think this one seems a bit more interesting because of the way that it's unfolding. The other one was pretty exciting as well at the time when it happened, because of the amount that was involved and all that. But at the end of the day, they did manage to resolve it, even though it took years to resolve. And it was pretty different then. This was about an equity investor wanting to get his investment out. All right. But this one is about a bank and a debtor, an obligor.
Right.
And it is also about an investor who had just now taken control over a bank, from the previous, controller, if I can use that word. So, yeah, that's the difference, really.
All right. I mean, we'll see how this ends up. They're already in court. But it's just the start of the year. What a way to kick off the year, by the way. Do you anticipate any other corporate battles ahead in 2025?
These corporate battles are pretty interesting and exciting because it does. I mean, it's all part of what happens, in any growing economy. So there could be maybe one or two more.
You don't want to mention names?
No.
You don't want to start anything or start the
They want to let the cat out of the bag, but there could be one or two if it's not resolved on time that could pop. Yeah, but like I said, I mean, these things are all healthy so long as it's all in the best interest of shareholders and investors.
Right. We'll see how and of course, we'll call you back on to give us more clarity.
Don't call me.
Corporate Wealth Encyclopedia. By the way, I mean, you've seen what has happened on the show today. He has given us historical context and, present and prospects as well. He has a book out, right?
Yeah.
Nigeria Corporate Stories.
Yeah, Volume 1.
So make sure you get your copy. So much has happened. He has covered it. He's covering this one as well. And of course, the ones to come. Thank you so much, Ugodre Obichukwu.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and share. And tune in for the next episode of In Good Company. Ciao.